Hi everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Korea This Week. I'm your host, Sang Kim, and today we have Juni Kim, KEI's Senior Manager for Operation and Technology with us. Thank you so much for joining us, Juni.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Great. So it's a rainy day in Washington, D.C., but we'll get started on the Korea-related news. So why don't we start with the recap from last week on the UN General Assembly meeting. So President Moon gave a speech addressing the General Assembly. So, Juni, could you tell us a little bit about his speech?
Yeah, sure. So, as expected, President Moon Jae-in continues to emphasize the importance of the denuclearization and peace process in South Korea and being very optimistic about the progress of it. But he did mention an interesting idea in terms of turning the DMZ, the demarcation area between the two Koreas, in an international peace zone. He mentioned that over the decades, because it has been very untouched, mostly untouched by a lot of traffic or humans going into the area, that's actually become a very ecological hotspot. That a lot of natural growth has happened there, and he emphasized that this could be a kind of like a peace zone, like something that could be seen as a positive instead of a negative, which I think is actually very creative and smart idea to do, because I think when people often think of borders like the Berlin Wall or something like that, it brings a lot of negative emotions out of it. But this is I think, creative way to turn what is a negative, that this border between the two countries, into a very positive thing.
Right. So unlike the name, it is the most heavily militarized zone, and also South Korea has been working with North Korea to remove mines and post guard posts along the DMZ. So, and what else did President Moon also address?
Yeah, so he also spoke about climate action at the UN, and South Korea's plan to host the second Partnering for Green Growth and the Global Goals 2030 summit in next year in June 2020. So emphasizing the need to address climate change and his administration's willingness to participate in that effort.
Right. President Moon also had many sideline meetings. Of course, the most important one being between President Trump and President Moon. So this was their 9th summit, and for them, what did they talk about during the summit?
Sure. So obviously, one of the main things that they talked about was kind of the current status of the peace process, and Moon was very complimentary towards Trump in terms of the efforts that he's done to kind of move the process along. He talked very positively about their meeting in June, where there's kind of a surprise meeting between Trump and Kim Jong-un at the border, and Trump was briefly able to actually step over the demarcation line. So he's very positive about that, and sort of positive talking forward about what progress that we can continue to make. So, and they also talked about the special measures agreement a little bit. Trump mentioned that, well, for one, on Trump's side, he mentioned that he was very positive in talking about the revised free trade agreement that went into effect, and talking about that as an example of good negotiations that occurred in his administration. And also talking about, as many are well aware of, one of Trump's big hallmarks during his administration is trying to get other countries to what he sees as paying their fair amount with regards to both security costs or trade deals.
Right.
And so currently we have a special burden sharing agreement with South Korea for U.S. troops that are stationed there. That was, I think, finished in March of this year, but is only good for 1 year, so they have to renegotiate the next one at the end of this year.
Right. So we mentioned last week that the first round of talks began last week. Yeah. So I mean, that's one out of many rounds of talks and negotiations that we'll have to go through. So we'll stay in tune for what they actually decide on, what they negotiate on. There are many things that involve, not only the cost, but also the term of the agreement. So we'll keep an eye on that. Next, I do want to talk about Korea-Japan. And of course, Korea-Japan trade relations and tension has been, going on for a couple of months now. So, Juni, could you give us a little update on where we are in terms of the trade between two countries?
Yeah, sure. So to briefly summarize the whole situation, Korea and Japan have had long simmering historical tensions against each other, which date back decades. And throughout the years, there are sometimes there's progress, sometimes things fall back. And then last year, the South Korean Supreme Court ruled that Japan is still responsible, or Japanese firms are still responsible for paying Korean conscripted workers during the colonial era, and that really irked a lot of Japanese in terms of they thought that this was a resolved issue, and so this has cascaded into tensions that have affected South Korean and Japan trade, and also security relations as well, which has kind of been seen as a bedrock between these two countries. Last month, South Korea pulled out of an intelligence sharing agreement with Japan that was signed a few years ago between the two countries. And so it's become kind of an escalating tit for tat a process that's worried a lot of people in both of those countries, but also around the world, because obviously these are two very large economies that not only affect people that live there, but here in the U.S. and elsewhere as well. So one recent thing that has happened, well, I guess one thing that we can talk about is Japan has approved some key exports for the industrial materials that are kind of under part of like kind of the sanctions that are currently happening.
Export control.
Yeah, export control. Sorry. So it's sort of a good illustration of the continuing tensions and how both countries are trying to manage that. On one hand, it's good that some of these were approved, but on the other hand, it's sort of a kind of a, because obviously there's an international audience that's kind of viewing all this as well, and both countries want to make sure that they kind of paint themselves in a rosier view, so that they can't get the blame from other countries that obviously some trade violations on their side.
Right. So the fact that they actually approved those exports mean that it is still possible for Japanese companies to export those key elements to South Korea, but obviously it takes a really long time and it's very difficult for the companies to get approved, they'll get licensed, and it could take up to 90 days to get that approval. So it's an extra layers of measures that companies would have to take in order to export those to South Korea. But they seems like they do approve it, so hopefully it would get better. So with the continuing trade tension, it did go up to WTO, World Trade Organization, and South Korea had filed a complaint on Japan for unfair export control on those three materials. So what is the update on that side?
So South Korea filed a complaint. Japan agreed to start the consultation with South Korea. The first consultation is expected to start in October, and then things can get dicey if they go one or two ways. So if they don't settle the consultations, then the WTO dispute settlement body will establish Japan to look further into the issue, and this could potentially be a very prolonged process that could last years. And so which kind of shows you all this has happened the past few months, but depending on how things go, we could kind of be in for a rough time.
Right. So obviously this affects both countries, and especially the businesses that are doing business in the respective countries. But there is one good sign that I did read on the news today, was that Samsung Electronics was recently awarded 5G network contract to KDDI, which is Japan's second largest telecommunication company. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So Japan, in their efforts to prepare for the Tokyo Olympics, which are happening next year, they wanted to get down all the infrastructure ready for, in this case, 5G. And Samsung won the contract bid. I think there were two other companies, Nokia and Ericsson that were also up for it. And I think Huawei was also considered early on, but I think it was struck out. Don't quote me on that, but I think they were also part of the competitive process. But I think that shows you, for one, that that even in light of all these trade tensions, that there's still commerce that does happen between the two countries, and a significant amount at that, and that can be seen as a good thing. That at the very least, trade tensions haven't gotten to the point where it threatens things like this, and so I guess to find a silver lining in a very tense situation. This is one example of that.
Right. So I believe the Japanese government has excluded Huawei due to national security reason and of course the tension around Huawei, especially in the United States. But the exact amount for a contract is still not confirmed, but experts say this could be up to $2 billion worth for Samsung for providing both 5G network and also the phones that are equipped with 5G services. So this could be huge for both Samsung and for Korea-Japan relations. So yeah, we'll see how this affects two countries and continuing the trade. So on Korea-Japan, I do want to mention again, and we mentioned this last week, KEI is hosting an event with KITA, Korea International Trade Association, on October 16th. So if you're interested in learning about Korea and Japan, especially from the business and also political side, please come visit us at KEI on October 16th at noon. And of course, as always, Juni works really hard to make sure that all of our events are live streamed and also posted on YouTube page afterwards, so you can make sure to watch our videos online.
Yeah. And to that point as well, we had an excellent presentation as part of our academic paper series a few months ago from Dr. Fakasi, who spoke specifically about how the business community in Korea and Japan can play a role in kind of being an advocate for better bilateral relations between the two countries, which is very relevant now in light of all the things that have happened in the past few months.
Right. We also have a podcast with Dr. Vakesi, so if you're interested in listening to podcasts, you can also look for that as well on Korean in Context. Lastly, I want to talk about inter-Korea sports diplomacy, so that we're seeing that a lot on the news. One, in relates to FIFA World Cup, a qualifying game, and two, 2032 Summer Olympics, which sounds like very far away.
Yeah, very far away. Yeah.
But it's, we always got to plan ahead. So, starting with soccer, tell us a little bit about the upcoming North and South Korea soccer match.
Yeah, so there is a soccer match that's expected to be held in Pyongyang on October 15th, I believe. And this is an unprecedented. I think in 2017, the women's soccer team in South Korea played in Pyongyang. So these things do happen, and obviously there's been lots of cooperation between the two countries in the past when it comes to sports. I think the most notable example is in the 2018 Pyeongchang Olympics when they fielded a joint women's ice hockey team at the Olympics. And so obviously if we're on President Moon's side for South Korea, this is obviously something that he sees as a way for encouraging greater South Korea and North Korea cooperation. The fact that he's mentioned the 2032 bid for having the two Koreas jointly hold the Olympics, which I think was also a part of when he went to Pyongyang last September. That was one of the clauses in the joint declaration that came out of that summit, that they would try to do something like that. So obviously a way of cooperation, but it's also not without some controversy as well. If you do remember in the 2018 Pyeongchang Olympics example, that the women's ice hockey team was actually controversial in South Korea because on the athlete side, a lot of these South Korean athletes worked really hard to get their spots on their team, and then a lot of them wouldn't be on the roster if they filled a joint team, and so because of that, there was some discontent among people that thought that was unfair towards the athletes. So obviously there's ways that you can cooperate, but there are ways that you kind of have to be careful about it in terms of how it appears to the public.
Right, and it seems like less people are enthusiastic about entering the Olympics with the joint flag compared to before. So a 2018 survey showed that the North and South Korea co-hosting the Olympics fell from 66% to 47%. That's a huge drop. So there is a change in people's attitude, and especially in the younger generation, how they see the joint team as, some people see it. I mean, older generation might see it as like, we're one country, we are unified, versus the younger generation seeing it as two separate countries.
Yeah. And
just to go add to the soccer tournament, So October 15th is the second round for the 2020 2022 FIFA World Cup qualification, and North Korea and South Korea are in the same group, so it has to be one of them that would qualify to the next round. And it's scheduled to be held in Pyongyang, but it's not really sure how the team will travel. Obviously, the traveling through the DMZ, just ground transportation, will be the shortest and easiest, but we're not sure how that would plan out. But the other option is for them to fly through Beijing and then through Pyongyang. So.
Yeah, which was the case for the prior when the women's soccer team played in Pyongyang. That's what happened. Is that they went through China instead.
Right. So we'll see more on that. Is there anything else you would like to add for this week?
I suppose one thing, obviously there's a lot happening here in DC in regards to President Trump and the impeachment inquiry. A lot of things happen day by day. So in terms of how much attention and work that his team focuses on, that might kind of take up some of the energy that would otherwise be put into maybe focusing on North Korea. But we'll see. That I think that's something to consider moving forward. That the domestic situation in the U.S. Does have impacts on foreign policy considerations and their priorities.
Also, South Korea as well. South Korea is also going through a lot of domestic challenges.
Yeah, sure.
Right. So, well, with that, that's all we have for this week. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for joining us this week.
Glad to be here.
And for next week, as always, it will be on Monday at 3 p.m. So we hope to see you next time.